Wow, wow, no, look at this. Everybody come around here.
1, 2, 3,
4,
4, 5, 6,
Right, there's the mother lode in there. And then right in there and back
7.
Well, I can see about 20.
I am in Dave Randle's garden in the city of Dunedin, along with Gabby and Harriet, who have just spotted fascinating tiny creatures that live on the forest floor.
So they're actually active hunters that hunt for themselves from the time they're born.
There's one in there. Not really crack there.
Good spotting. Now that's great spotting, isn't it?
What we are looking at are Peripatus or velvet worms. They are kind of a purplish color, just about 2 to 3 centimeters long, slowly crawling about in the cracks and crevices of rotten logs.
That's just a Peripatus castle in there. All the wee cracks and crevices that they've got. So these are sort of adults. There's a group there which are called sub-adults with adults.
They look similar to a caterpillar but do not have any visible segments along their body. They have multiple pairs of legs and a pair of antennae with which they sense. They are called velvet worms due to their soft, velvety appearance, but they are not really worms. They are so unique that scientists have classified them into their own separate phylum, Onychophora. To put things in perspective, all of the insect species have their own phylum, Arthropoda. And they have been around for over 500 million years, way before the dinosaurs.
They're living fossils.
And they're older than trees.
They have the claws on the end of their feet. They like to live. They like to live in crevices in rotting wood
and damp places.
Yeah, damp places would be good. And I don't think you'd find one in a very dry pine cone. So.
Gabby and Harriet Dale are studying in Year 6 and Year 3 in Tainui School, Dunedin. They have developed a special interest in the Peripatus and have dropped into Dave's garden to explore further.
People just think of like wolves and bears and stuff to be really cool and scary, but if we were the size of an ant, these would be like demons to us. It'd be like terrifying monsters.
I think that small stuff are more interesting and funner to find, because if you were just walking in the forest and then you saw a bear, because that would be scary, but if you saw a bear the size of a Peripatus, it wouldn't be scary.
People say, it was like seeing a dinosaur, but it's far older than a dinosaur. I mean, it's a remarkable thing.
This is Peter Dearden sharing about how he felt when he saw a Peripatus for the first time.
I'm a professor in the biochemistry department at the University of Otago and director of Genomics Aotearoa. There's been 2 occasions in my life where I've kind of been shocked, right? Where you sort of opened up the piece of wood and there was this thing living there, and it looks almost exactly like the things that lived in 540 million years ago. I had the same feeling. I had the luck to be taken to Whenua where the kakapo live, and the first time I saw a kakapo, it was like, oh my god, this is amazing. So yeah, it was a sort of revelation that this thing lived here, and then I kind of thought, what do we know about it? Do we know what it eats, how it lives, how it breeds, all these things? And it turns out we don't. We have so little information. It's cool to see these things and then realize we know nothing about them.
My name is Karthik, and this is Tune Into Nature, a podcast bringing you sounds and stories from the wild. We journey through Aotearoa, New Zealand's wild places to meet unique wildlife and hear from the people working to protect them. I hope these stories will inspire you to enjoy nature in your own way. I talked to Dave Randle about his journey of protecting the Peripatus, to Gabby and Harriet about their interest in these little-known animals, and with Professor Peter Dearden on what his team is doing to unravel the mysteries about these ancient creatures.
I call myself Peripatus Advocate, habitat creation specialist, and Peripatus whisperer because I can whisper them up, and general friend of the things in the undergrowth.
Over 30 years ago, Dave Randle found Peripatus in this garden around his house in the Caversham Valley area. Since then, he's been working to create habitats in his garden to protect them. His property is around 2 hectares, with predominantly exotic trees.
These are some Corsican pines, blue gums, Macrocarpa, Lawsonianas, one or two big old native trees, some broadleaves, big old corfai, a huge old rata. I've just always been really interested in nature. I grew up in the UK, where we lived in Somerset, southwest England, and I'd be coming home with animals, and I turned my parents' backyard into a zoo. So I had newts and frogs and lizards and slow worms, and it was like a legless lizard, in fact, and grass snakes and mice and everything. So I just was fascinated with that one from a young age. The Peripatus have become, if you like, my flagship species for urban biodiversity, or actually a flagship phylum, because they're their own phylum.
Dunedin is one of the only 3 known cities in the world where Peripatus live in an urban environment. There are over 200 species of Peripatus around the world, and in Aotearoa, only 9 species are scientifically described, but there could be over 20 species yet to be formally described. And we actually do not know much about the Peripatus in New Zealand.
Peripatus, we don't really understand their reproduction very well. We don't understand, in New Zealand at least, and even the ones in Dave's garden, we don't really know what they eat in the wild. So they're hunters, but we don't really know what their prey is. Dave's garden is odd in that there are thousands, possibly tens of thousands of these individuals. Well, that's strange, right? They're all predators. You know, you would be very surprised in an ecological situation to find an environment stuffed full of predators. How does that work? We know a lot about fruit flies, for example, but that's because for over 150 years now, people have studied them intensively, and there are thousands of people in the world studying them. Well, there's tens of people studying Onychophora, and they haven't been studying them for that long. And so I think these are just an example of some of the weird invertebrate organisms that are sort of neglected and not well understood, not just in New Zealand, but around the world.
Peter and his team at Genomics Aotearoa are working to understand more about the Peripatus by sequencing its genome for the first time in the world.
All we really had to do was to extract really high quality DNA. So in each of the cells of a Peripatus, as in your cells, there is this DNA which is coiled up there, and it's wrapped in proteins and various other things. So we had to extract that DNA so that we got all those proteins off, and then we sequenced it using a technology that basically pulls those strands of DNA through a tiny hole, and as those bits of DNA go through the hole, they deform the structure of the hole, and that leads to a tiny change in current across the hole, and that tiny change in current can be read in a way to determine what those base pairs going through the hole actually are, so the sequence of the DNA.
The DNA contains 4 bases, A, T, C, G, which are also called base pairs. And with this 4-letter code, DNA contains all the information to build an entire organism.
So when it came down to it, that was extracting the DNA was okay. It's fine. Getting lots of sequence was fine. And then we discovered that these things had a very, very large genome. So the human genome is sort of 3 billion base pairs. This guy's 12. So they're much larger. And that has meant that obviously when we extract that DNA, we can't get all the DNA in one long strand. It's broken up into bits. And so we try and sequence all those bits, but then it's like this massive jigsaw puzzle. You know, it's a jigsaw puzzle where we have 12 billion pieces and all the pieces are the same. And so we've taken a lot of time trying to what we call assemble, so put that genome together so we can understand where the genes are and what order they're in and how they fit together. So that's taken a very long time and a huge amount of compute power. So we've had enormously important support from NESI, which is New Zealand's e-science research infrastructure. So they run a whole bunch of supercomputers which are based at Greater Point in Wellington. Thing. So, you know, when your laptop starts to warm up and the fan goes and you think, oh, it's thinking hard. Well, imagine doing that for a year and a half. We're really worried we're contributing to global warming because we're keeping Wellington warm. But also, I'm quite proud that we've crashed them as well. That sometimes we the stuff we're asking them to do is so difficult for them that actually they've crashed, and we've had to solve those problems and recode and start again and things. So it's kind of nice to have access to these machines where we can do these sorts of analyses, but also that they're that actually they're happy for us to try out things which are going to be slightly problematic over the long term. And we managed that, so we now have the sequence, and we can go through and say, look, these are the genes that are there. We can compare with other arthropods and start looking at the relationships of these Peripatus to other things, which is really cool.
A genome contains all the hereditary information of an organism, including its genes and DNA. So by sequencing the genome and finding out what genes the Peripatus has, Peter and his team can learn more about the evolutionary history and the unique adaptations of Peripatus.
Peripatus have invaded land independently of everything else. So we think about fish turning into amphibians and invading the land, and arthropods invading the land. Peripatus did it on their own, and so I think that there will be genes in the genome which will help us understand how they went from marine to living in air. The Peripatus also have this remarkable system of catching their prey. So they spit glue at their prey and haul so the glue comes out and it solidifies, and then they can haul it back into their mouth and chew the prey up. So we found the genes which are required to make that glue. So trying to understand how that glue works, how kind of cool thing, right? It's liquid and then it gets fired and solidifies and then is edible. So I think there's lessons there that we can learn, and actually just understanding what the bits of the genome look like in comparison to other species is the really key thing, right? So understanding some of those genes that control the way embryos work and looking at how they may have changed between Peripatus and other phyla, and also obviously the arthropods is that's been really interesting. So it turns out there's all sorts of hints in there that might help us understand how these things are different and how they're related to arthropods.
Genomics can also help in the conservation of a species.
So the genome unlocks a whole load of analyses we can do which will help us understand the species. Is it, how many species of Peripatus are there? Are they endangered? Do we really need to worry about conserving them? So that's a really big part of what's going on. The other thing I think is, here is an example of an animal which has done a whole load of things that other animals have done, but they've done independently. And I think understanding how that works will help us understand how life evolves and how animals evolve, which I think is really, really important as well. That question has to wait for a bit as we start doing the conservation, because I think, we're in a situation where this animal has been sort of neglected in all around the world, and it's hard to know whether, in fact, Dave's garden is sort of what it used to be like in New Zealand, and that actually we've lost millions of these animals, and there may be extinct species, there may be, populations we've not heard of, and we need to understand that. It's really, really important to ensure that when we do science, we're not just observing a species going extinct. We're doing everything we can to help out and make sure that our science can help the preservation of these things.
Back at Dave's place, Gabby and Harriet tell me about what they had found at their school grounds.
It was really exciting. Me and my friend were just at the top of the adventure looking for Peripatus. We saw this huge tyre, and there was this kind of stream coming off a dirt bank, and I was just like, this is a perfect place for Peripatus. It was really hard lifting the tyre over because it was filled with concrete or something. We had to dig under it, and then it took 2 people to lift it over. Riley, she helped me dig around the edges of the tyre and then lifted it over, put her fingers through the gap so she could lift it, which was pretty risky because there could be antibiotic spiders in those cracks. So she did pretty well lifting it. And we found this old piece of wood, like a plank underneath it, so we lifted that over, and there were 2 Peripatus just sitting there. And we brought it to the teacher, and he took some pictures. Yeah, then we put it back under the piece of wood and put the tyre back.
And when Gabby told me about that she was looking for Peripatus in her school, I was like, oh, that's nice, dear, but didn't think she'd actually find it, and she proved us wrong, so we're really proud of her.
This is Marcia Dale, Gabby and Harriet's mother. Marcia is an ecologist working with the Otago Peninsula Biodiversity Group.
I'd like to acknowledge how awesome the school's been. Tainui school's been really amazing with wanting to get involved and wanting to help with enhancing the habitat so we keep them safe. The school's been really pro-environment, and we're just really lucky that our girls have got to go to such an amazing school.
Out in the garden, Dave shows me the habitats he has created for the Peripatus. They range from log stacks to plastic covers put out on the forest floor that can help create the moist environment suitable for Peripatus. And in one of the logs, we find a young Peripatus.
So that's unusual, just to see a little baby out there by himself. Certain areas where you just get maybe 300 or 400 juveniles in one area, and maybe just a couple of adults, almost like a creche or a nursery. Really, I don't know whether that applies to animals anywhere else, but then in some other places, all you would get would be big adults. Obviously, they're breeding, and I don't know whether they just get rid of their babies off to the creche. But very, very interesting. I found that in several occasions, just a whole load of babies and small ones in one place, and maybe just a couple of adults with them. Probably their sort of idea of a preschool, Peripatus preschool.
Peripatus are strange in the fact that some species lay eggs and some give birth to live young.
The ones here are live bearers, and when the little babies are first born, they're basically just almost clear to white. Then they start to develop a slightly grey colour. That's a sort of still, I call that one a juvenile. And then as they get to be a bit bigger, like a sub-adult, teenager sort of style, then they start to developing the colours and their full pigmentation and the full colouring when they get to about half size, something like that. There'd be probably some reason for that. I mean, in the human world, I would say that kids can be quite colourful, but it's slightly different in the Peripatus world. They're a bit less colourful when they're young, and then they perk up a bit later on.
Dave's insights into the Peripatus are helpful to other researchers working to monitor Peripatus around New Zealand.
Dave's got quite a lot of little pieces of plastic around the property, and quite a few of them have got Peripatus living under them in that kind of humid environment.
This is Jo Carpenter. She is an ecologist working with Manaaki Whenua Landcare research.
So we're interested in whether these kind of plastic shelters could be used at other places so that we can detect Peripatus in different habitats, because obviously they're really hard to find otherwise. They're really cryptic. It can be really destructive when you're looking for them. So if we can design a kind of monitoring method that allows us to do that without destroying their habitat, that would be really helpful.
Jo's work is part of the People Cities Nature project, working to restore urban green spaces around Aotearoa, New Zealand.
It will take us around 9 months to do the field work, so just to determine the sites where we do have Peripatus based on trying to use this new method of monitoring them, and then perhaps a year after that for us to do all the kind of mathematical modelling and write the report and everything. So yeah, I look forward to sharing the results in a year or so.
With this collective interest about the Peripatus, there is growing awareness about the creatures and the things we can do to protect them.
I would really like to see Peripatus protected under the Wildlife Act. Very few invertebrates are protected currently under the Wildlife Act, but I feel Peripatus, and I'm sure many other invertebrate species that I don't know much about, should also be protected. So I'd love to see that level of protection for them.
Maybe some people could have like a section of their garden, like if they're near Peripatus sanctuaries, they could dump all their wood there, maybe not garden in that place.
We need lots of more dead logs in lots of different places, all around Dunedin. So then there'll be lots of Peripatus everywhere, and it'll be good because there'll be more Peripatus in the world.
I think they're just another canary in the coal mine, really, in terms of what's happening with the planet and the changes in the planet. And we need to be careful to look after all of our canaries, no matter what shape they come in.
I think every one of you should go out in the garden and see if you can find one, and then tell me, right? Because we don't know where they live, and it may be that they're living in your garden, in your under your rhododendrons or under your trees. And in fact, more generally, spend some time outside looking for small things. You know, New Zealand is packed full of interesting insects and snails and peripatus, and you know, when you go tramping, don't just think, oh, you know, we're going to go and see some kaka, and we're going to go and see some big trees. Also think you might see some really, really small things, and some of those things are older than you can possibly imagine.
You are listening to Tune Into Nature with me, Karthik. Peripatus or Onychophora are one of the most little-known creatures in New Zealand and around the world. You can learn more about them at the Onychophora website, and there are also other links you can explore in the description. A few years ago, I produced a short film about Dave's work of creating habitats for the Peripatus. You can watch that on YouTube. Please check out the links in the description. We will be back with more great stories about wildlife and nature, so please follow the podcast on your favorite listening app. And while you're there, please leave a rating. That would really help. The podcast is kindly supported by the New Zealand Lottery Grants Environment and Heritage Fund, administered by Te Tari Tai Whenua, the Department of Internal Affairs. Supported by Professor Nancy Longnecker, Science Communication, University of Otago, ORFM Dunedin, and Wild Dunedin, New Zealand Festival of Nature. Thanks for listening.